Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances. Easier said than done. It's tempting for us here in the 21st century to disregard this exhortation by Paul in Thessalonians as unrealistic or idealistic, or possibly even dismiss it altogether as the advice of a giant of the Christian faith, a super apostle, after all, whose character and faith metal is far beyond yours and mine. And besides all that, Paul didn't live in the dystopian chaos that is living in the 21st century. But we would be wrong. Paul's life was no picnic, to be sure. An itinerant preacher and teacher traveling from town to village to city, far from Jerusalem or Rome or his home in Tarsus, now in present-day Turkey. Paul traveled as far as Asia Minor, evangelizing people all the way, the people that he met, teaching them the life and the way of following Jesus. On that way, he got into a lot of what we call good trouble. Trouble with local government officials and with religious authorities. Trouble with soothsayers and charlatans. Trouble with Rome. Trouble with classical cultures. Trouble with fellow Jesus followers in Jerusalem. He made quite a few enemies along his travels. And he did it all at a time when the whole world was coming apart at the seams. Doomsday cults were popping up everywhere. Rome, the greatest military and colonial expansion operation the world had ever seen, was struggling to maintain order and control over its vast empire, using violence and intimidation to keep its empire together. New, cutting-edge technologies and dangerously avant-garde schools of thought threatened classical schools and culture, flying in the face of all that was accepted as reality. Does that sound vaguely familiar to you? Dystopian chaos would actually well describe Paul's world. And in the midst of this chaos and violence grew a burgeoning new community of followers of a marginalized Palestinian Jew named Jesus of Nazareth, himself an itinerant teacher and prophet who had been hated by his own people, excommunicated for his religious beliefs, and executed by the Roman Empire for sedition. All for teaching love. Adding to the drama of it all, Paul taught that this Jesus who was killed was also raised from the dead by the God and Father of all people, so that he was also the Son of God, the Most High God. Now, this teaching of Paul's was controversial, to say the very least. In fact, it got him thrown into prison on more than a few occasions, and it also got him executed. All for teaching love. So if we are tempted to dismiss Paul's teaching to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and give thanks in all circumstances, simply because we assume, having lived in the first century, Paul couldn't possibly understand all that we face in this chaotic, violent, and unpredictable world of the 21st century, or that Paul couldn't possibly understand the complexities of a 21st century American life, we need to think again. In his own words, Paul writes, "We," that means he and his merry band, "are pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." It's a curious thing about Paul. that he is pressed on every side. He is perplexed, persecuted, and struck down, but he is not crushed. He is not despairing. He is neither abandoned or destroyed. Though he lives in a world turned upside down, full of the same chaos, violence, and uncertainty we have come to know so well in our own time, how is it possible? How is it remotely possible, from a prison cell, from on the road, that he is not crushed, despairing, or destroyed? Hope. Paul has hope. Now, it's not the hope akin to wishful thinking. It's not the kind of hope that is akin to delusion or denial of reality, the denial of the truth of what is. His is a hope fiercely rooted in the moment. It is a hope fiercely rooted in loving action. It is not hope that somehow good things will come out of bad, or the hope that we just may do the right thing in the face of overwhelming temptation to do the wrong. No, that kind of hope is a beggar. Paul's hope is in Jesus. It is what we might call Christian hope. Paul refers to this kind of hope in his letter to the Romans. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. It is the kind of hope that the psalmist wrote about. Yea, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my stronghold. I will not be shaken. It is the kind of hope the prophet Zechariah proclaimed when we are told, return to your stronghold, ye prisoners of hope. Prisoners of hope. I love that. And that is the invitation to Advent, that we might be Advent prisoners of hope, looking to God's future for our confidence, our strength, and our assurance in our chaotic, violent, and uncertain world. It is hope in God's future. So what kind of hope are we talking about here? Once again, Paul reminds us in his second letter to the church in Corinth that we are to fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For it is in the unseen realm that hope exists. What we can see is temporary, Paul writes. But our hope is in the anticipation of what is unseen, and it lives in the eternal reality of things that are not yet come. It is a hope grounded in the Advent reality that the God who came once upon a time to a manger far, far away, to a chaotic, violent, and unpredictable world in the form of a meek and vulnerable baby named Yeshua, God saves. The hope that this God will come again to this chaotic, violent, and unpredictable world in the form of a glorified, judging, justice-bringing, and redeeming Christ. This is Advent's message to us, that he will come again, and he will save us from ourselves. This kind of hope is confidence in God's future. You know, I hear often these days, especially from so many young people, disenchanted with their parents and grandparents' generations who have and continue to squander their future with climate change, denialism, and wasteful living habits. I hear often that there's no hope for the future if it's just going to be full of the same old habits and choices, more of the same old, same old. What kind of future is that? These young people, though, I don't think realize that we too have grown up in a world given to us by our own parents and grandparents, where we had to be courageous to live each day in the face of our newfound capacity to destroy ourselves in one fell swoop. And so to them I say, yes, we have let you down. And your hope in us is folly. It is therefore, I say to them, and I say to you, it is in God's future that we must find courage and strength and vision and hope, because God's future is worth waiting for. God's future is worth living and working for now. God's future is worth praying and dying for. God's future is worth hoping for. In Advent, we watch and we wait, anticipating with hope the future by focusing on the reality of what was and is, who was and who is, the living presence of the fleshy Emmanuel, God with us in the flesh, in our time, our flesh, that we might become holy and might have hope in Christ for a future filled not with more of the same old chaos, violence, and unpredictability, but more of that which we can never get enough. God. And it is this truth, and it is this joy, and it is this hope that gives us the ability to live now. And not just live, but thrive and walk as people who have seen a great light. It is precisely our hope in God's future that enables us to do in our chaotic and unpredictable times just as Paul did in his. Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. And give thanks in all circumstances.